Welcome to my League of Legends project where I will use Python and SQL to perform data analysis on the game League of Legends. My objective was to theory craft which characters in the game are the strongest and most effective based on real statistical data instead of personal bias and subjective opinions like most other tier lists out there. First, we import all of our libraries and connect to our database. And here we create the tables by initially dropping everything so we can then recreate the entire database cleanly from scratch. This is a method to convert CSV files to pandas data frame and then into an SQL.db file. And it loops through each one of the tables that we want to construct. For the stats table, it was so large with over 1.8 million rows that it had to be converted into chunks and then added piece by piece. Here I added constraints to each table so that they all had primary keys and foreign keys. And next I created triggers that we'll test later to handle illegal insertions and then cascading deletions. Here I created indexes for every single table in order to help speed up the run times of the following search queries. And here are our queries. The first of them are simply looking at the top 5 rows in each of our tables in the database so that we can see a print output of what's in each one of our tables. Now we get into our real queries where first I wanted to look at picks, bans, and win rates and determine the top 5 characters in each of these categories. And based on popularity, we can see here that Lee Sin is the most played character in all of League of Legends. And when you look at total wins, there's an obvious correlation between this list and the one above because it's literally the same characters, except Lee and Kate are now switched, which means apparently she wins more than he does. So, in order to determine how much a character actually wins, you want to look at averages instead of totals because that just becomes a popularity contest. And when you look at actual winning percentage, it turns out Ivern is actually number one. And of all the characters in this top 5 list, Ari is the only one that actually appeared in the popularity contest. So apparently Ari mains are the only ones of good taste because everyone else is playing characters that actually don't win that much and yet are popular regardless. And then when you look at the champion bans, these are characters that people do not want to play against. So they must think that they're OP. And anecdotally, Yasuo does have that reputation of being one of the most broken characters in the game, with by far and away the most champion bans out of anybody. And yet his actual winning percentage doesn't compare to Ivern, who when we look at his actual number of bans, it's less than a third of what Yasuo's is, even though his win percentage is much higher. And his pick rate is so low by comparison that it shows how people are not playing characters based on how good they objectively are in the game. They're playing them based on completely arbitrary criteria. Next, I wanted to look at kills, deaths, and assists, as well as damage per second and goal generation. So when we look at the total numbers for KDA, you have a similar list to the top 5 in popularity before. All these total stats are going to come down to characters that are just played the most because they're going to have the most opportunity to generate the highest sum totals. So to look at how they're really performing on a per game basis, we look at averages instead. And when you look at average KDA sorted by just the most kills, you can see that all 5 of these characters are melee assassins. When you look at the average damage dealt to champions per game, the characters on this list are all range DPS, showing that if you want to get lots and lots of kills, then melees with burst damage are better. But if you want to do steady, consistent damage, then you want to have range. And then next, I wanted to look at what is the best predictor of gold generation. And it turned out to be average overall damage dealt, including damage to champions as well as damage to minions. And Ivern here is number one on the entire list by a huge margin, which is probably a big reason why he's got such a high win rate. And then when we look at the same search query, but sorted by gold earned, it's almost identical. The only two differences are notably Karthus and Draven. And this is because of very unique strategies for those two characters in particular. Draven has his passive where he can generate a bounty and then cash it in by killing someone. Karthus has that cheese strat where you take the first strike rune and then spam his ultimate off of cooldown just to proc the extra gold you get from first strike. Next, we did trigger testing for those triggers that we had created earlier. And I waited till after I'd done all my search queries to do this because in order to test these triggers, I have to make changes to the database, which would have invalidated all of the data analysis that I previously performed. So first, I attempt to insert a champion into a match that it's already banned for. And we can see here an exception is thrown, and this is the custom error message that I wrote to tell the user you can't add this champion to this match, someone's already banned it. And next, I wanted to test all of the cascading deletions by getting rid of Teemo from the game. Because let's face it, it would be an objectively better game if Teemo didn't exist. And in order to show that he's really gone and not just in stealth mode or whatever, we've counted the amount of rows from the participants table in which Teemo was played. So this is the total number of players in our data set that use Teemo. And we also counted the total number of rows in the entire stats table. Now we delete him, and we see that after the deletion, the number of people who are playing Teemo has been reduced to zero because their accounts have been banned. They shouldn't be allowed to play the game with their Teemo main. And then when we recount the total number of rows in the stats table is now lower. And we can see that the difference between the old value and the new value is the exact number of players who had been removed from the game for playing Teemo.